LiSTNR production.
Hi, Sasha Barbagat with you. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Briefing. Pro-Palestine protest encampments are springing up at university campuses across the globe. It all started at New York's Columbia University last month, and within days, more than 100 students were arrested after the college called in police to break up the encampment. There have been developments at Columbia overnight, and we'll cover those in the headlines. But back at home, there are now reciprocal protest camps at ANU in Canberra, Curtin University in Perth, the University of Queensland and Melbourne University, while the University of Adelaide launched its own yesterday. We sent LiSTNR reporter Helen Smith to the Sydney Uni camp to find out how and why they're protesting.
We're here to oppose a genocide and to oppose apartheid. That shouldn't make anyone feel unsafe. It might make you feel uncomfortable if you are supporting that genocide or if you are supporting that apartheid. But at the end of the day, we are standing here and we are opposing violence and we are opposing a society which is inherently making Palestinian people unsafe.
That story coming up in the second half of the briefing. But first, Antoinette Lattouf is here with the headlines. It is Thursday, the 2nd of May.
Thanks, Sasha. G'day, everyone. Australians have come together at candlelight vigils around the country overnight to remember the victims of domestic and family violence. So far this year, at least 28 women have died from alleged gender-based violence. There's been an almost 30% spike in the rate of women killed by an intimate partner. So the vigils were held after an urgent national cabinet meeting between state and federal leaders who met in a bid to address the crisis.
It's an issue for civil society. It's an issue for the media. It's an issue for all of us to work together in the national interest to deal with what is a scourge of violence against women.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese there.
Yeah, so what did we actually get out of yesterday's National Cabinet meeting? Well, the centrepiece announcement was $925 million in funding to help women escape abusive relationships, with that money to go towards permanently establishing the Leaving Violence program over 5 years. Another one of the main policies to come out of the meeting is the criminalisation of deepfake pornography. Under new laws to be introduced by the government, creating and sharing deepfake porn will be illegal. Money will also be set aside in the upcoming budget to test online age verification technology. The response to these announcements has been pretty lukewarm. While advocates believe it is a step forward, they are saying there's no immediate change and more needs to be done. They're also calling for extra funding. The Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence Commissioner, Michaela Cronin, has told Nine she intends to hold the government accountable to its commitment to address the issue.
I think there was a bit of a refocusing of the discussion around what is it we need to be doing and thinking about how we hold men accountable in a different way, all the way through from primary kind of prevention approaches that will actually make a difference and talk more about men's accountability.
So the SNAP National Cabinet meeting failed to secure any significant commitments from state and territory governments, and these are the jurisdictions that are responsible for the bail laws and justice responses that have come under really intense scrutiny as women are killed by men known to the police or court system. So this has certainly disappointed advocates. However, there will be a meeting of the state and territory attorney generals and police ministers this Friday where it's hoped they'll discuss it. A national cabinet is set to reconvene on the issue of violence against women in the next couple of months.
More than 300 people have been arrested at New York's Columbia University after police raided a campus building they'd taken over. The uni has been the scene of a pro-Palestine encampment since last month, with students occupying parts of the campus and demanding Columbia cut ties with Israel. Reps for Columbia say they had no choice but to call in law enforcement to remove students and protesters from the building. It's called Hamilton's Hall and it sits just adjacent to the encampment. There are claims the protests had been infiltrated by non-students who encouraged the campers to escalate their actions.
They were concerned about chaos. There's nothing peaceful about barricading buildings, destroying property, or dismantling security cameras. We cannot allow what should be a lawful protest to turn into a violent spectacle that saves and serves no purpose.
That was New York Mayor Eric Adams, and it's worth noting student spokespeople at Columbia have denied that they were infiltrated by outside influences.
And so when students overtook Hamilton's Hall, they released a big banner saying that they were renaming it Hines Hall. And Sasha, I don't know if you remember the case of little Hind. She was the girl who called emergency services from a car after her family had been killed by Israeli gunfire. Do you remember that call to authorities? And then paramedics came to try and help her, and then they were all killed, the paramedics and Hind?
Yeah, I do. It was so awful. And one of those instances, I think, when people on the other side of the world felt they could relate, or I suppose empathise, and imagining their own children, their sisters and their brothers in that position. It was truly tragic.
Meantime, violence has also broken out at a sister camp at the University of California after pro-Israel protesters breached a buffer zone that had been set up to separate the rival groups. And it was pretty confronting stuff. Like, video captured on the campus shows pro-Israeli protesters attacking the encampment protesters, attempting to tear down barricades, hitting campers with sticks and bats, and even trying to use the barricades to hit the protesters. Police are now at the scene and monitoring, Sasha, but I think it was it's pretty interesting to see that nobody was arrested for the violence or for bringing weapons onto campus.
It's worth noting, Antoinette, that this all comes on the backdrop of these ongoing ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas, and that is something that campers, talk about. They want ceasefire, they want an end to the violence in Gaza. Now, this story has been bubbling away since over the weekend and early this week, and the last update we had is that Hamas has left Cairo, and they are still considering that proposal from Israel, which would include the release of 33 hostages in exchange for a larger number of Palestinian prisoners. There's also discussions on allowing displaced Palestinians to return to the north of Gaza, and also a second phase of a truce, which we last saw in November, that would involve a period of sustained calm. But Benjamin Netanyahu still says that he wants to push ahead with this ground invasion of Rafah, even as this ceasefire negotiation kind of hangs in the balance.
Yeah, and I don't really know what a sustained calm means. It doesn't actually equate to a ceasefire, meaning stop fighting, stop killing. And so, I don't know, the skeptic or perhaps the realist in me has a pretty strong gut feeling that this isn't going to go ahead as is. And some of you listening might be using an AI chatbot like ChatGPT to help you out at work or with assignments, and you've probably sat at a computer to access the technology. So now a new rival to OpenAI's bot is launching its version, and it's been designed for you to use it on your phones. It's called Claude, and it's been developed by a company called Anthropic, which is led by a group of former OpenAI staff who quit over differences with Chief Executive Sam Altman. And the idea is that we use our phones so much, and the technology should be meeting consumers where they are.
Claude, which is an interesting name for a chatbot, but sure, why not? It's more advanced than ChatGPT and will be able to, with consent, access a user's camera and photo library. The example I read was that, you just finished a meeting, you take a photo of the whiteboard and you pop it into Claude and you say, hey, can you summarize this? And so I can email it to my team and they can have notes from the meeting. So, all these amazing things AI can do, it kind of boggles the mind. Now, Claude is expected to heat up the competition because there are very few rivals to OpenAI's ChatGPT currently on the market. So yeah, I don't know how I feel about using these programs on my phone. It feels too easy. I don't know, it feels too easy to access. I prefer when I have to actually sit down at a computer and use it.
Yeah, too easy to access everything else that you've got going on there. But another thing where Claude seems to be smarter than ChatGPT, it seems to have more self-awareness. So during testing, like independent testing, Claude was asked to pick out a particular sentence that was hidden among heaps of random documents, and it's kind of the equivalent of finding a needle in a haystack in AI times. And not only was Claude able to do that and find the so-called needle, it realised it was being tested, and then when it was revealing the answer in its response, it also said that it knew that it was being tested to see if it was paying attention. So It seems that Claude has self-awareness.
Yeah, which is what we're all so terrified of with these bots if they start realising that they can take over the world. Antoinette, thanks so much for joining us for the headlines today. Next up, it's our look at the pro-Palestine encampment happening at universities across Australia. We visited the one in Sydney to find out more. Students at a number of universities across Australia have joined a growing global movement of campus protests against Israel's war on Gaza. There are encampments at ANU in Canberra, Curtin University in Perth, the University of Queensland, Melbourne University and the University of Sydney. These involve students camping in tents on the open spaces of their campuses. They're calling on their institutions to cut ties with companies that are making weapons for Israel, like Lockheed Martin. Some are also demanding a boycott of Israeli universities and exchange programs, and are calling for open dialogue about the war in Gaza and a condemnation of the killing of Palestinian civilians. These Australian camps were set up in the wake of protests that began at Columbia University in New York. Hundreds of students there were arrested when the college sent police in to break up the camp late last month. Many of those students have since been suspended, but a huge number of protesters remain on the scene. Staff and teachers at Columbia have walked off the job in solidarity with protesters. But the university has told the encampment they want them gone before graduation ceremonies planned for May 15. As I said at the top of the podcast, things escalated quickly at Columbia yesterday when Riot police entered a building being occupied by protesters, leading them out in zip-tie handcuffs. Hundreds of police stormed the building, Hamilton Hall, which was beside the encampment, with Columbia issuing a statement saying the building had been, quote, vandalised and blockaded, leaving administrators with no choice but to call the police. The college has requested police remain on campus until at least graduation day on May 15. The campus is now closed except for students who live there and for essential staff. Back home in Australia, things have remained pretty calm, but things did ramp up a little this week when a group of school children visited a site in Sydney. This was called, quote, the Kids Excursion to Sydney University Palestine Solidarity Encampment, end quote, event. And it was hosted by a group called Families for Palestine. Children as young as 5 were heard chanting 5, 6, 7, 8, Israel is a terrorist state. Footage also showed the children chanting, Albanese, you can't hide, you're supporting genocide. Organisers for the event promoted it as a way to, quote, inspire our children to stand up for justice and solidarity. However, it has raised some eyebrows with certain sections of the community. We spoke with the Australasian Union of Jewish Students President Noah Loven to hear what he had to say about it.
Jewish students at the University of Sydney are fearful, they are being intimidated and sometimes harassed. That feeling has perpetuated since October 7th. There's also instances even prior to October 7th of these incidents happening, but since the installation of the encampments at the University of Sydney specifically, those tensions have significantly risen.
Organisers for the event promoted it as a way to, quote, inspire our children to stand up for justice and solidarity. While, like I said, things have remained pretty calm at Australian encampments so far, discussions are being had about whether protests like this can be effective. Last week, Antoinette Lattouf spoke with Sydney Uni academic Tim Breedis on the briefing. He said the protests, which had only just begun at Columbia, felt like a defining moment.
There's this narrative that student protest is over, that students are just apathetic, that they're consumers, that they're not as radical or concerned with the world as they were during the Vietnam War era. I think this is a real challenge to those notions. It shows that student protest is still vibrant and active.
Helen Smith is one of our team here at The Briefing, and you've probably heard her on The Weekend Briefing with Antoinette bringing you the list. Helen visited the encampment at Sydney University and she's filed this report for us.
So before we get started, we should acknowledge the privilege of these students in having the time and resources to protest in this way, in some cases without attending classes or working. I first spoke to Declan, who is one of the organisers with Students for Palestine and the Vice President of the Sydney University SRC, the Student Representative Council.
I was one of the people who came up with the initiative and idea to spread this encampment from what we saw in Columbia in the United States to here in Sydney.
Yeah, so do you guys have any ties or communication with the other encampments going on around the world?
Yes, we are in communication with organisers in Colombia, at CUNY, in NYU and the New School in New York, as well as activists in the University of California, Berkeley as well. We're in constant communication with them, learning their lessons, talking with them, sharing messages of solidarity. At a rally last week here at the encampment, I shared a message of solidarity that we had received from the New School in New York.
And what are you hoping to achieve with this encampment at the University of Sydney?
We want to occupy this visible space outside of the university's most famous building, the quadrangle, in order to demand that our university cut ties with the state of Israel, cut ties with the genocide that is being carried out right now against the people of Gaza. Those ties look like the university's connections with the weapons company Thales, the sixth largest weapons company in the world, where the university has a memorandum of understanding which allows for student and staff research to go towards perfecting Thales' military technology, which then they sell to Israel. These weapons and technology allow Israel not only to carry out and to institutionalize its apartheid system in the West Bank, but to carry out the genocide in Gaza too. We're also demanding that the university cut ties with Israeli academic institutions such as the Tel Aviv University, the Technikon Institute, and the Hebrew University, because we believe that such partnerships with universities in Israel help to legitimize Israel and its apartheid system. And we encourage and welcome all students, no matter your race, no matter your ethnicity, to join as a part of that.
And how long do you guys plan to do this encampment, or will you escalate it in any way?
We plan to continue this encampment until the university meets our demands, until the university divests and cuts ties with the state of Israel and the genocide it is carrying out. We're planning on growing the encampment every single day. There are more tents, there are more students joining us, there are more community supporters joining us. We are planning to grow this encampment to be a really visual symbolism of the support for Palestine on this campus amongst staff and amongst students.
Have you been contacted by the police about the encampment on campus?
We've received no official communication from the police. They've barely visited as well. And we've received official communication from the university to all students and staff that their camp is allowed to exist as part of our freedom of speech as students. I think that is an incredible win considering the university's past track record of calling police onto campus in order to crush protests that the university doesn't like, and the university's harassment in particular of Palestinian pro-Palestine activism and activists as well.
Next, I spoke with Amal Nasser, who is an organiser at the Palestine Action Group, who's come down in solidarity to support the students. We saw earlier some members of the public coming down, giving supplies and food. How has the reaction from the general public who aren't part of the university been?
There's been mass support for this encampment. I've come in support of this encampment, and I try to organise around here where I can, and I'm not a university student at this uni. So generally we've seen mass support. I think the Australian public is sick and tired of seeing public goods, including in public universities, being sent out and being used to support a genocide. I think people think that's unacceptable, and that's why these types of movements have had a lot of mass support.
On the back of students in the universities, there have been reports of Jewish students feeling unsafe from protests on uni campuses across the globe. What would you say to those students?
Well, some of our lead organisers at this camp are Jewish, and Jewishness is not inherently linked to supporting the state of Israel. I think that's something that we've been trying to explain for years, and Jewish people have been trying to explain for years as well. We're here to oppose a genocide and to oppose apartheid. That shouldn't make anyone feel unsafe. It might make you feel uncomfortable if you are supporting that genocide or if you are supporting that apartheid, but at the end of the day, we are standing here and we are opposing violence, and we are opposing a society which is inherently making Palestinian people unsafe. And that society would make everyone feel safe and would be a much better place to live in.
I then spoke with James, who's part of the Freedom Flotilla and who grew up in a Jewish household. So we just spoke with a few of the students and organisers about the encampment at the University of Sydney here, and we were talking about Jewish students across the world having reports of them feeling unsafe due to similar protests. You're Jewish yourself, or grew up Jewish. What would you say to those students?
Well, I grew up in a liberal Jewish community in London, I've been participating in anti-racist struggles for decades. So someone who got brought up Jewish, I'm not practicing in Judaism, it's a belief, and it's not an identity which is ascribed to me, it's a belief. But I was brought up Jewish, I experienced some anti-Semitism as a kid growing up. But on protest sites like this, there's nothing anti-Semitic here, there's anti-racism everywhere. It exudes anti-racism and anti-Zionism because, as people say, and quite correctly, anti-Semitism is a crime, but anti-Zionism is a duty. So I oppose Zionism. So there's so many Jewish people around, so many anti-Zionist Jews, people engaging, chatting around here. And yes, people who are Zionists should definitely feel very uncomfortable being in this space because when they come to this space, they're confronted with humanity, with decency, with anti-racism, common sense, and a lot of love around. And people just want things to be better, but realising that it's not going to be better until there's justice. So there can be no peace before there's justice. There's simultaneous things that have to happen.
I also spoke with Harrison, who's been at the encampment since it started.
I've been here since Tuesday last week when we first set up around 4 or 5:30 p.m.
And what does the day-to-day kind of look like at the encampment? Like toilets, showers, food?
Yeah, so luckily we have such a, I think, community warmth towards this encampment that's continuing to be expressed every single day. So we wake up, there's already food delivered, people will go have a shower. So we have showers in the library, showers in the social sciences building, showers sort of all hidden across campus. And so we've all figured out the locations of them so we can go shower. Some of us will go home, do a little supply run, come back, or go home and get some more change of clothes and come back. And as we go into the evening, some buildings get locked down, so toilets are a bit harder to access. Brush our teeth, get ready for bed.
And how long are you prepared to stay at this encampment?
For as long as possible. I'm prepared to camp out for whether it's a few weeks, a few months, until the university does cut ties with Thales and Israeli institutions to ensure that our education isn't something that's used to help slaughter overseas.
And when it first started, how many tents were there? How many people were there compared to all of the tents we see now?
Yeah, so first night there was probably like 8 to a dozen tents around, mainly on these 2 sections of the quad lawns here. And since then it's expanded greatly. Now we have about like 50 people, 60 people staying over each night. We've even extended out to the quad, to the full sort of front lawns of the quadrangle, where we set up more gazebos. So it's just grown exponentially over the past few days.
Now these students are part of a worldwide movement at universities, which have a rich history of activism. But it does beg the question, is privilege what it takes to get action?
That was Helen Smith, briefing producer and host of The List on the Weekend Briefing, with her report on the pro-Palestine encampments at Sydney University. And that is all we have time for this morning. Before you go, though, we would love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it or get something out of it. And a reminder, we put up full episodes of our Weekend Briefing on YouTube. Search us at LiSTNR Newsroom on the Tube. Otherwise, we're also on TikTok and on Instagram, where you can check out our other content. I'm Sasha Barbagat. Thanks for listening.
LiSTNR.